We have a brand new rail district that's just been formed that most of you probably haven't even heard about yet. This is the newly created Brazoria-Fort Bend Rail District. It's what, about a month or two old? That's it? Yeah, 2 months old now. Dr. Metcalf is going to serve as the project director for this. He's personally involved with all project at Thames and has built the firm's reputation based on professional product and close client interaction. Dr. Metcalf is a professional transport economist with 30 years of planning experience. Previously, he was chief economist for British Rail, one of my favorite places, and I'll be traveling there next month. And he was also responsible for the planning of a number of major rail freight and port projects.
In Maryland today. What I want to do is to describe the project that has been developing over the last 2 years from Brazoria County, Port of Freeport, and Fort Bend. As was suggested, they had created a rail district, and Richard Fields, who is, we believe, about to be appointed executive director, is here today. So any of you want to hear any details on the way in which it's going to be set up, operated, and run, Richard, your man. So let me begin. We've been working on this project about 2 years. Okay, about 2 years, and we really are excited about what the results are showing. Just a little bit on Thames. Transport economists, kind of a crazy crowd, but the kind of things we do, some were related. The most important qualification we had for doing this job was we were the guys who built the toll and revenue models for the Panama Canal and built the software, and it's on their computers. We did the work for the banks on the Alameda Corridor, which has actually got a lot of very common characteristics with the project that we're doing. Okay, let me begin by talking about Texas. I come from Maryland. We don't grow in Maryland. It's very interesting to come to Texas where you'll grow at a very fast rate. And it was interesting, we were down in Panama City, earlier this week, and they were boasting about their 6% growth rate. And I was very pleased to tell them that we in Texas, see, I've already become a Texan, basically grown at 6% over the last 10, 20 years, and that we intend to keep growing at that rate once we get over this minor hiccup associated with the oil prices. We're going to grow our population by, according to the official forecast, from 26 million to 40 million by 2050. If we do that, we had better build the transportation system that will support that population. That doubling your population requires a lot of extra transportation infrastructure, and we need to do that. Okay, just to show you that I'm not making up the numbers about Texas growth, I think it's something you have in the water down here that makes you grow so quickly. We don't seem to have that same water up in Maryland. The official forecast by the comptroller for Texas says 3.5% real. If you add inflation to that, you're talking 5.5%. So that's a pretty conservative forecast by the government, who are always, making their forecast conservative. We actually think it'll be a little faster than that once we get through the current sticky period. As you know, if you grow your economy, you have to grow all the goods and services you provide. These people that you're going to bring to Texas are going to require houses, they're going to require furniture, they're going to require cars, they're going to require all the goods and services that are necessary. And what we find is that the volume of containers that you need to import is directly proportional to your growth. And if your growth is going to be at 6% per year, then your growth in containers is going to be at least that much. And that's a lot of containers. And that means that the ports of Texas are going to have to work extra hard in the future in order to be able to keep up with the growth that we're faced with. Okay. interesting piece of news is that when we looked at the logistics market here in Texas, we find that the Dallas-Fort Worth area in particular, but Texas in general, is the third largest logistics center in North America. We all know that LA Long Beach is a huge logistics center. We all know that New York, New Jersey is a logistics center, but it never occurred to me that Dallas-Fort Worth and the Texas market was in fact the third largest logistics center. So not only we got the third largest logistics center, but we know it's going to grow very rapidly in the future. In terms of the way that logistics market is served at the moment, is that essentially the Port of Houston serves the Port of Houston. The Port of New York serves the Port of the New York area. And the rest of the country, all that pink and green, is basically served by the West Coast. LA Long Beach is serving basically the Dallas-Fort Worth market. So what we see is that if we look at the Dallas-Fort Worth market, over 71% of the boxes, containers coming into Dallas-Fort Worth are coming from the West Coast. Only 2% of the boxes coming into Dallas-Fort Worth are basically from Houston. Okay, so Houston has a very small part of the Dallas-Fort Worth market and is really not serving the Dallas-Fort Worth market. Even in Houston, the Port of Houston only serves 50% of the Houston market, and actually the West Coast serves basically 46%. So the LA is even serving the Houston market. So when you look at who is serving what markets here in Texas, we find that essentially the West Coast ports are serving the logistics market, which is the third largest market in North America. Well, if we look at the Dallas-Fort Worth market and what's going to happen to it in the future, what we find is that from about 750,000 boxes a year, it's going to go to 2.1 million. It's going to triple. So while you grow, you're going to triple your market for boxes in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. So this is a very substantial increase. And the issue is how are we going to serve it? You can see at the moment, it's actually cheaper to serve this Dallas-Fort Worth market from basically LA Long Beach. It's cheaper than bringing it in through Houston. So that's why shippers are shipping from China through LA Long Beach into the Dallas-Fort Worth market, and basically coming in through Houston, which would mean going through the Panama Canal, basically is more expensive. Even in Houston, it's only break even to bring a box from China. So that essentially what we're looking at is even Houston really is having competitively a difficult time competing with the West Coast. And essentially the reason why people do ship to Houston is because Houston is unique among North American ports in basically having backhauls. And as you know, in the transportation business, if you've got a backhaul as well as a front haul, then basically there is good reason to use that market. So what's going to change in the future? Well, what's going to change in the future is the Panama Canal is due to open this year, and as a result, instead of little ships, which are 2,000 to 4,000 TEUs each, we're going to be seeing ships up to 8 to 10, maybe even 12,000 TEU being able to come through the Panama Canal. So that in effect, the Gulf Coast and the East Coast of the U.S., in terms of Asia trade, can be served by the same size ships as are currently serving the LA market. Now, for those of you who are involved in any kind of marine transportation, you'll know that as you increase the size of the ship that you can serve, basically the cost is significantly reduced. If you want a rule of thumb, the rule of thumb is that when you go from a 4,000 TEU vessel to an 8,000 TEU vessel, you cut the marine costs in half, okay? From 4 cents per TEU down to 2 cents per TEU mile, okay? So the equation that the shippers who make the decision about how goods get to the Dallas-Fort Worth market make when they're in China is going to be based on a new set of numbers compared with what we have at the moment. As a result, it's going to be that a port on the south coast of Texas, on the Gulf, will become dominant in this blue area. It will be the lowest price will be in that blue area, will be from the south coast. And even outside it, so Dallas-Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, St. Louis, Kansas City, and maybe even Chicago can effectively be served cheaper from the south coast of Texas than coming in through the west coast. So essentially this new area could be carved out, and as a result of carving it out, the Texas ports could in fact capture a large market share of a large hinterland that basically will allow them to beat out LA in that market area. Well, let's just look at the example. Here we are in China, and you can see that in effect at Houston, we have a very, very real advantage to Houston in terms of coming into the country. And basically in Houston itself, the advantage is even bigger. We're talking $200 or $300 a box. Okay, $200, $300 a box, a 40-foot container. That is significant to Walmart. It's significant to Target. They are going to want that lower price. And as a result, they're going to put pressure on the industry to provide it with goods at that price once they know that it can basically be done. So that we find that the Dallas-Fort Worth market will now be cheaper to be served from a South Coast port, okay, than it will be to be served from the West Coast. Big change as a result of the Panama Canal opening. Now, one thing about big ships is they demand deep water. You've got to have 50 foot of water. Unfortunately, we're in a situation at the moment on the South Coast that we have a port of Houston which will only ever have 45 foot of water. But there are 2 ports on the South Coast that I'd like to know what it is, because basically you need 2 railroads into a container port. The shippers want it. If you build that, though, if you build the port and you build the railroads to it, then our estimate is that Freeport, a port of Freeport, could actually take about 1/3 to 40% of the market off the West Coast, and it would come through a port like Freeport. And essentially, however, one thing to note, because we like to point this out, is that the West Coast, the blue, would still continue to provide containers into this market area. But in effect, conservatively, we think that a port of Freeport, the red, could basically be a 30 to 40%. Secretly, I think it will be higher, but publicly, we're saying 30 to 40%. Okay. What would that mean for the port of Freeport? It would basically mean the port of Freeport would have about 3 million TEUs, which would make it a medium-sized port, like the size of Savannah or Vancouver. It wouldn't be a super port like LA. It wouldn't be well up in the tens of millions of boxes, but it would be 3 million TEU, and that's a very big, very useful size port to develop. Okay, so how are we going to do this? And this is where it gets interesting. Well, first of all, we have told the port of Freeport that they have to build at least 3 berths to get started, and eventually 5 or 6. Port of Freeport has a lot of constraints on its land use, and so we're saying you've got to give us three berths for the large ships to begin, and then 5 later on. And on top of that, we want to get these containers that are coming into the Port of Freeport up to Dallas-Fort Worth, okay, which is this large logistics market area in the center of Texas. So we want a greenfield railroad built, a 60-mile greenfield railroad built basically to Rosenburg, where we find we've got the confluence of KCS, UP, and BNSF. 3 railroads coming together right there. So it's a major rail hub, and if we can go those 60 miles, then basically we've created a situation where containers with on-dock rail can be moved effectively up to Rosenburg. We think that UP needs a little help getting to Hearn, so we would like to suggest the doubling of the BNSF track. We would be willing to build the doubling of the BNSF track to Caldwell, which would give UP access then to Hearn and to its Dallas yards. BNSF, of course, runs all the way from Galveston, and they have access right already up there. And we will also be able to serve with on-dock rail service San Antonio, because UP has a line there. So we're saying that 60-mile greenfield plus some improvements on the rail lines that run from Rosenburg would result in a distribution system from the port that would be cost effective against sending those boxes by rail all the way from LA Long Beach. Okay. We've looked at the finances. Now, when you are in southern Texas, what I've learned is that they like to do everything through the private sector. We've looked at the finances for example, this is the rail portion, the 60-mile, and what we find is it could create a very nice private sector project, about $1 billion, that would basically have a strong financial return and basically could be done by the private sector. We believe this project is going to be a private sector project, financed. It will be a PPP, and we think that the private sector will come up with the $1 billion required for the rail. We need probably about $2 billion for the port and about maybe another $500 million for highway improvements. So we're looking at a $3 to $4 billion project, but we believe the private sector will be ready to step up, make that investment, and basically create this opportunity for Texas. If we do that, it's going to have some very significant job creation impacts in southern Texas. Essentially around Freeport, we're talking about 10 to 20,000 jobs. If we look up at Rosenburg, we're talking 5 to 10,000 jobs being created there. These are jobs that otherwise would be in LA, okay? When you tell people in Texas, boy, we're taking jobs off the future in California, people in southern Texas seem to get really excited. So quite clearly, there's seen to be some real advantage in bringing those jobs from LA to Texas. In Dallas-Fort Worth, we're assuming the jobs that would be created there, and there will be jobs created, would actually be created whether or not the traffic comes from Freeport or comes from LA. Okay, and the other thing is we are going to create a lot of jobs. We're going to create a lot of income. And our estimate in terms of direct and indirect job income is that it will put $750 million of income into that region, that corridor, every year. So this is a lot of income, extra income that will be generated for Texas as a result of building this project. So this project basically can create $750 million of extra income into the corridor each year. And furthermore, it will even increase the tax base for the government. Basically, we're saying direct and indirect jobs create about $40 to $50 million of extra taxes in Texas, and we think that's a good thing because it will definitely help the government. Okay. One final thing. We want a cooperative arrangement with the Port of Houston. We believe that the Port of Freeport's role is to be the Port of Dallas-Fort Worth. We're not looking to be the Port of Houston. We don't want to compete with the Port of Houston. We want the Port of Houston to go on being the Port of Houston and serving the Houston market, which is half the size of the Dallas-Fort Worth market. But we want Freeport to become the Port of Dallas-Fort Worth, and we want, if we make those investments, we believe that we will beat out LA Savannah, because of the Meridian Speedway, which I'm sure many of you know about, could also be competitive because it ends in Dallas. But we believe that by making those investments, we can basically build a major project. It's certainly a project of national significance. We believe it's a project of international significance, and certainly the people in Panama City, Panama, that we talked to earlier this week, believe the same. So we think that with a cooperative arrangement between ourselves and the Port of Houston, essentially will create a major significant opportunity for Texas, creating jobs, creating income, and creating an expansion of the tax base. Thank you very much.
Number two, if there's a question for Dr. Metcalf. Yes, ma'am. We'll bring a microphone right over to you. Right over here.
Thank you, Dr. Metcalf. Can you tell me a little bit about when this will increase the flow of rail traffic coming through the border and into Mexico?
Yes, indeed. The model we use to make these projections is basically a worldwide trade model and handles every port in Canada, U.S., and Mexico. We think that, there's going to be continuous growth on the West Coast. The Port of L.A. and Long Beach face tremendous problems. All of you who are looking at the newspapers the last couple of years have seen the capacity problems, the strikes, and other things that have occurred on the West Coast, and they've had situations where they've had ships lined up. We think that all along the West Coast, there will be a need to expand port capacity, and basically we think Mexico will play an increasing role in supporting the West Coast ports, as indeed Prince Rupert has in Canada. So we believe that that is all going to be part of the growth, but we're not concerned that it will be a major player in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. Port of Freeport wants to serve Dallas-Fort Worth. It doesn't want to, we know that the West Coast is going to, we may be as competitive as far west as El Paso, but beyond that, we are not going to be competitive. The West Coast ports are going to be the competitive ports. But we believe the ports of Mexico will expand, and they will continue to support the logistics markets in inland distribution in the U.S. But remember, there's a lot of markets west of Texas. And, you're looking at markets that basically are coming out of the West Coast, supported by the West Coast, but the Mexico can certainly compete in there. We believe that KCS will play, a very strong role in basically supporting the growth of logistics distribution, certainly in the west of the Mississippi, but particularly west of Texas.
Take one more question. Hang on for just a moment. We'll get the microphone over to you.
I don't know.
You probably
is this
don't
mic
need it, though.
working? So BNSF and UP both have massive investments in their long-haul infrastructure from LA to Dallas, and they're private companies. What if they decide they want to protect their long hauls by reducing prices in the LA to DFW lane and raising prices in the Freeport to DFW lane?
Yeah, very, very good question. One thing you'll note in my presentation was I pointed out that the West Coast will be losing market share to Freeport, but they'll actually be increasing volume. And we actually think that the West Coast has capacity problems. For example, we were asked by Exxon to look at getting oil out of North Dakota into Southern California, and in the end we told them the only way to go is to go to Seattle and barge it south. We think that UP and BNSF will have increasing volume out of the West Coast. We think they will continue making investments, but we don't think that they will be able to compete as effectively with a market as far west as Dallas-Fort Worth as something out of Freeport. Now, we see BNSF and UP actually regarding the Freeport opportunity as being a reliever to their West Coast problems. It's an alternative route and an alternative way. Are there other railroads that could service the Dallas-Fort Worth market from Freeport? Certainly, there are other railroads that could do it. And we certainly think that BNSF and UP are the natural choice. They already have cooperative agreements to support the Port of Houston. If they don't want to do it, however, a short line operator, certainly as far as Rosenburg, and other developments north of that could provide an alternative into the Dallas-Fort Worth market. So, yes, we would like to see UP and BNSF embrace the project. We think that it may be that they we've invited them to participate in the next phase of studies, and we would like it, but we do believe there are other opportunities if in fact they, for whatever reason, decide not to participate. So we think they have their hands full with the volumes from the West Coast. We think they will have a hard time keeping up with the investment there, whereas this investment is very, very good. One other benefit I should mention is that if we build the Freeport to Rosenburg bypass, we effectively build a rail bypass to Houston, so that you don't have to go into downtown Houston in order to get to Dallas-Fort Worth. That is very valuable, and UP and BNSF would both benefit by having the ability to shorten their trip by 35 miles, so that if they're bringing traffic along the South Coast from Brownsville or wherever, basically they would have the benefit of a reduced route by using the Greenfield route that we're proposing from Freeport into Rosenburg. So we think there's a lot of benefits for UP and BNSF in the development of this line. But you're quite right, they will want to consider it, and we anticipate, they will have a lot of comments, and there will be a healthy discussion about, exactly what the agreement would have to be to get BNSF and UP, or BNSF and KCS, or a short line rail operator on board to have a competitive environment. You cannot open a container port in the U.S. without two railroads. If you want to have a container port in Freeport, you have to have two railroads in Freeport, and you have to have that competition up as far as what we see as Dallas-Fort Worth, because that is the market that Freeport will serve. Okay, I hope that helps. It's a lot of discussions still to be gone through, but we think it's definitely a project that's very valuable to Texas and will make a great contribution to Texas. And I'm sure just as when you relocated a car plant here, you eventually agreed to have two railroads serve it, then I think you'll do it the same with the port. Thank you.